Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Red Room Stories. I know many of you tune into these tales to help you drift off to sleep. So, before we settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. The dusk cloaks the hills in shadow as Elise trudges through the rugged terrain, her flashlight wavering in her grip. Its beam cuts through the gloom, searching for her brother Amos, who vanished after a frantic call about a crooked lantern glowing in the wilds. His voice shook with terror, the line dropping mid-plea, leaving only silence behind. The air hangs crisp with pine and a faint, sour rot, urging her deeper into the expanse. She clutches Amos's pocket watch, found ticking faintly near a boulder, its hands warm against her palm, drawing her onward. A flicker pulses through the earth, low and unsteady, trembling the ground beneath Elise's boots. She pauses, sweeping the light across the hills, its glow catching on jagged rocks and a hollow where the terrain dips unnaturally. The flicker beats, rhythmic and eerie, pulling her toward the depression where shadows cling thick and dark. She calls Amos's name, her voice thin against the vastness, answered only by a faint, dry rustle from the hollow's depths. Her heart pounds, but she presses forward, the watch glinting in her grasp. The hollow reveals a lantern, its frame bent and crooked, its glass streaked with a dark, oily sheen that shimmers in the flashlight's beam. Elise's light trembles as she approaches, spotting Amos's scarf, tangled in the dirt, its fabric soaked with that same sheen. The flicker deepens, thrumming through her legs, and she peers closer, the beam revealing a faint, twisted glow within the lantern, pulsing irregularly. A scrape rises from the hollow, slow and deliberate, and her stomach twists, dread rooting her in place. A shape darts beyond the hollow, swift and hunched, vanishing as Elise swings the light. The rustle grows louder, joined by a hiss that slithers through the air, alien against the hill's silence. She shouts for Amos, her voice faltering, and the hiss turns into whisper-soft, overlapping voices rising from the lantern. She steps back, clutching the scarf, her boots kicking up dust. The whispers swell, blending with the flicker, a chorus pressing against her ears. She examines the lantern, the light catching on its base, littered with debris bones, cloth, trinkets all coated in that oily sheen. Elise's breath fogs as she spots Amos's ring, its band warped, pressed against the glass as if trapped inside. The whispers sharpen, and a hand lunges from the glow, pale and clawing, scraping the air before retreating. She stumbles back, the flashlight slipping, its beam spinning across the hollow, the flicker shaking the ground around her. Footsteps shuffle behind her, heavy and uneven, stirring the dirt with each deliberate stride. Elise turns, the light trembling, glimpsing a figure tall, its limbs too long, its head tilted wrong before it melts into the dusk. The footsteps circle, closing in, and she bolts toward a crevice near the lantern, clutching the ring, the whispers rising into a scream that pierces the night. Shapes loom along the hollow's edge, their silhouettes swaying, too many to count, their presence a weight on the air. The crevice swallows her as she slides down its slope, the walls tight, the air thick with damp and decay. Her light flickers, illuminating gashes scratched into the stone frantic, overlapping, stretching deeper as she descends. The scream echoes, joined by a dragging scrape that sends chills up her spine. She lands in a chamber, its ceiling low, its floor littered with lantern shards that shimmer under the beam. Amos's coat lies in the center, soaked in sheen, surrounded by bones still wet with marrow. A figure crouches in the shadows, its form cloaked in tatters, its head bowed over a pile of debris. Elise's light shakes as she approaches, recognizing Amos's boots, but the figure turns, revealing a face that isn't Hispale, eyeless, its mouth twisted in a crooked grin. It lunges, and she swings the flashlight, cracking it against its skull, the bulb shattering, plunging the chamber into darkness. The scream surges, shapes shifting in the black, their claws scraping stone as they close in. She runs, hands groping for the crevice. The creatures pursue, their scrapes and drags filling the air, their twisted forms pressing through the narrow passage. Elise claws upward, the stone cutting her palms, the coat slipping as she reaches the surface. She bursts into the hollow, the hills alive with moving figures swaying, their heads cocked, the scream a deafening roar. The ground trembles, the crevice widening, swallowing the lantern as she flees, the dusk blurring around her. She trips, tumbling into a ravine, the ring glinting beside her in the dirt. Elise crawls free, the hills endless under the shadowed sky, the flicker fading, the figures gone. Her flashlight lies broken, the ring clutched tight, its metal warm against her skin. A wanderer named Ruth finds her on a rocky path, soaked and muttering, the sheen still clinging to her hands. She tells her story at Ruth's camp, words spilling out about Amos and the lantern, met with a furrowed brow as Ruth offers tea she doesn't drink. Ruth glances outside, the hollow's faint outline in the distance, and stays silent, her hands steady but pale. The next day, Elise leads Ruth and a tracker, Levi, to the hollow, but the crevice has vanished, the ground smooth, the bones and coat nowhere in sight. Levi sighs, suggesting exhaustion or a trick of the light, but his eyes linger on the ring, its sheen faintly pulsing in the sun. Elise returns home, the apartment cold, Amos's scarf inexplicably on the counter, dry but heavy. Sleep evades her, the whispers echoing in her ears, the sheen's chill lingering on her skin. Then she finds a note in Ruth's handwriting. I bent it, slipped under her door. The lights dim one night, and the flicker surges, rattling the walls. Elise grabs a knife, the ring glowing faintly, its sheen thrumming as shadows stretch across the room. The scream seeps through the floor, joined by thuds against the windows, the ceiling, the door. She barricades herself in, the knife raised, but the shadows thicken, hands pressing through the walls, pale and crooked. The windows crack, dust swirling inward, and the lights die, the whispers drowning her cries. Morning breaks, the apartment empty, the knife on the floor, the ring and note gone. The door stands locked, the windows intact despite the cracks. Elise vanished. A neighbor, old Mr. Vance, hears screams in the night, sees shapes slink toward the hills, but the trackers find no tracks, only Ruth, standing at the hollow, staring at the ground with a haunted gaze. She mutters about Levi, her lost brother, hinting the crooked figure was him, shaped by the lantern she once twisted. The hills grow still, but the flicker lingers, faint and persistent in the air. Ruth adjusts her scarf, her hand steady as she steps away from the hollow, the sheen still clinging to her fingers. She recalls the day she bent the lantern, Levi's voice fading into its glow, his whispers now part of the chorus. The hollow stands quiet, its surface unbroken, but the rustle persists, a reminder of the depths below. She walks on, the watch Elise dropped ticking in her pocket, its rhythm unsettling. Elise's absence weighs heavy, her footsteps erased from the hills. Ruth reaches her camp, the fire low, the night closing in around her. She pulls out the watch, its face pulsing faintly, mirroring the flicker that follows her. The shadows shift, shapes swaying just beyond the firelight, their whispers growing louder. She grips her knife, the blade steady, but her eyes dart to the hollow, the lantern calling her name. The tracker, Levi, had warned her once about the wilderness, his voice firm before he vanished. Ruth remembers his tales of the crooked lantern, its hunger for those who lingered too long. She shakes off the memory, but the flicker intensifies, the watch warm in her hand. The fire flickers, casting long shadows that twist and sway, their forms too familiar. Night deepens, and the flicker becomes a roar, shaking the ground beneath Ruth's feet. She drops the watch, its glow illuminating the dirt, the whispers now a scream in her ears. The shapes close in, their claws scraping the air, their faces crooked yet grinning. She swings her knife, the blade cutting nothing but shadow, the fire dying as the darkness swallows her camp. The hollow stands alone in the hills, its ground sealed, its air gleaming with fresh sheen. Ruth's scarf lies abandoned, her knife buried in the soil, the watch gone. The hills stretch on, their shadows long and still, whispering tales of lost souls and crooked horrors. Elise's name joins Amos's in the stories. Carried on the wind, a warning etched into the dusk shroud. The wilderness waits, silent and patient, the crooked lantern's glow pulsing beneath the earth. The flicker persists, soft and inviting, beckoning the next wanderer who dares to heed its call. The dusk wraps the forest in shadow as Ruth trudges through the dense undergrowth, her flashlight wavering in her grip. Its beam slices through the gloom, searching for her sister, Theo, who vanished after a frantic call about a fated choir singing in the trees. Her voice quivered with fear, the line cutting off mid-whisper, leaving only silence behind. The air hangs thick with damp moss and a faint, sour rot, urging her deeper into the woods. She clutches Theo's hairpin, found glinting near a root, its metal warm against her palm, drawing her onward. She clutches Theo's hairpin, found glinting near a root, its metal warm against her palm, drawing her onward. A hum vibrates through the leaves, soft and unsteady, trembling the earth beneath Ruth's boots. She pauses, sweeping the light across the forest, its glow catching on gnarled branches and a clearing where the trees part unnaturally. The hum pulses, rhythmic and eerie, pulling her toward the open space where shadows cling thick and still. She calls Theo's name, her voice muffled by the foliage, answered only by a faint, dry rustle from the clearing's heart. Her heart pounds, but she presses forward, the hairpin glinting in her grasp. The clearing reveals a circle of trees, their bark faded and gray, streaked with a dark, oily sheen that shimmers in the flashlight's beam. Ruth's light trembles as she steps inside, spotting Theo's scarf, tangled in the roots, its fabric soaked with that same sheen. The hum deepens, thrumming through her legs, and she peers closer, the beam revealing a hollow beneath the trees, its edges slick with a strange film. A whisper rises from within, slow and deliberate, and her stomach twists, dread rooting her in place. A shape flits beyond the clearing, swift and faint, vanishing as Ruth swings the light. The rustle grows louder, joined by a hiss that slithers through the air, alien against the forest hush. She shouts for Theo, her voice faltering, and the hiss turns into voices soft, overlapping chants rising from the hollow. She steps back, clutching the scarf, her boots sinking into the soft earth. The chants swell, blending with the hum, a chorus pressing against her ears. She examines the hollow, the light catching on its mouth, littered with debris bones, cloth, trinkets all coated in that oily sheen. Ruth's breath fogs as she spots Theo's ring, its band warped, nestled among the remains. The chants sharpen, and a hand lunges from the dark, pale and clawing, scraping the roots before retreating. She stumbles back, the flashlight slipping, its beam spinning across the clearing, the hum shaking the ground around her. Footsteps shuffle behind her, heavy and uneven, stirring the leaves with each deliberate stride. Ruth turns, the light trembling, glimpsing a figure tall, its form faded, its head tilted wrong before it melts into the dusk. The footsteps circle, closing in, and she bolts toward the hollow, clutching the ring, the chants rising into a scream that pierces the night. Shapes loom along the clearing's edge, their silhouettes swaying, too many to count, their presence a weight on the air. The hollow engulfs her as she slides beneath the trees, the walls tight, the air thick with damp and decay. Her light flickers, illuminating gashes scratched into the earth frantic, overlapping, stretching deeper as she descends. The scream echoes, joined by a dragging scrape that sends chills up her spine. She lands in a chamber, its ceiling low, its floor slick with sap that shimmers under the beam. Theo's coat lies in the center, soaked in sheen, surrounded by bones still wet with marrow. A figure crouches in the shadows, its form cloaked in tatters, its head bowed over a pile of debris. Ruth's light shakes as she approaches, recognizing Theo's boots, but the figure turns, revealing a face that isn't her spell, eyeless, its mouth open in a silent chant. It lunges, and she swings the flashlight, cracking it against its skull, the bulb shattering, plunging the chamber into darkness. The scream surges, shapes shifting in the black, their claws scraping earth as they close in. She runs, hands groping for the hollow. The creatures pursue, their scrapes and drags filling the air, their faded forms pressing through the narrow passage. Ruth claws upward, the earth crumbling under her palms, the coat slipping as she reaches the surface. She bursts into the clearing. The forest alive with movement figures swaying, their heads cocked. The scream a deafening roar. The trees tremble, the hollow widening, swallowing the roots as she flees, the dusk blurring around her. She trips, tumbling into a ditch, the ring glinting beside her in the dirt. Ruth crawls free, the forest endless under the shadowed sky, the hum fading, the figures gone. Her flashlight lies broken, the ring clutched tight, its metal warm against her skin. A wanderer named Levi finds her on a muddy trail, soaked and muttering, the sheen still clinging to her hands. She tells her story at his camp, words spilling out about Theo and the choir, met with a furrowed brow as he offers tea she doesn't drink. Levi glances outside, the clearing's faint outline in the distance, and stays silent, his hands steady but pale. The next day, Ruth leads Levi and a tracker, Clara, to the clearing, but the hollow has vanished, the trees smooth, the bones and coat nowhere in sight. Clara sighs, suggesting exhaustion or a trick of the dusk, but her eyes linger on the ring, its sheen faintly pulsing in the light. Ruth returns home, the apartment cold, Theo's scarf inexplicably on the counter, dry but heavy. Sleep evades her, the chants echoing in her ears, the sheens chill lingering on her skin. Then she finds a note in Levi's handwriting, "I sang with them," slipped under her door. The lights dim one night, and the hum surges, rattling the walls. Ruth grabs a knife, the ring glowing faintly, its sheen thrumming as shadows stretch across the room. The scream seeps through the floor, joined by thuds against the windows, the ceiling, the door. She barricades herself in, the knife raised, but the shadows thicken, hands pressing through the walls, pale and faded. The windows crack, leaves swirling inward, and the lights die, the chants drowning her cries. Morning breaks, the apartment empty, the knife on the floor, the ring and note gone. The door stands locked, the windows intact, despite the cracks. Ruth vanished. A neighbor, old Mrs. Pike, hears, screams in the night, sees shapes slink toward the forest, but the trackers find no tracks, only Levi, standing at the clearing, staring at the trees with a haunted gaze. He mutters about Clara, his lost wife, hinting the faded figure was her, bound by the choir he once joined. The forest grows still, but the hum lingers, faint and persistent in the air. Levi adjusts his coat, his hand steady as he steps away from the clearing, the sheen still clinging to his fingers. He recalls the night he sang with the choir, Clara's voice fading into the harmony, her chants now part of the trees. The clearing stands quiet, its trees unbroken, but the rustle persists, a reminder of the depths below. He walks on, the hairpin Ruth dropped glinting in his pocket, its warmth unsettling. Ruth's absence presses heavy, her footsteps erased from the forest floor. Levi reaches his camp, the fire low, the night closing in around him. He pulls out the hairpin, its metal pulsing faintly, mirroring the hum that follows him. The shadows shift, shapes swaying just beyond the firelight, their chants growing louder. He grips his knife, the blade steady, but his eyes dart to the trees, the choir calling his name. The tracker, Clara, had warned him once about the forest, her voice firm before she vanished. Levi remembers her tales of the faded choir, its hunger for those who listened too long. He shakes off the memory, but the hum intensifies, the hairpin warm in his hand. The fire flickers, casting long shadows that twist and sway, their forms too familiar. Night deepens and the hum becomes a roar, shaking the ground beneath Levi's feet. He drops the hairpin, its glow illuminating the dirt, the chants now a scream in his ears. The shapes close in, their claws scraping the air, their faces faded yet chanting. He swings his knife, the blade cutting nothing but shadow, the fire dying as the darkness swallows his camp. The clearing stands alone in the forest, its hollow sealed, its trees gleaming with fresh sheen. Levi's coat lies abandoned, his knife buried in the soil, the hairpin gone. The woods stretch on, their shadows long and still, whispering tales of lost souls and faded horrors. Ruth's name joins Theo's in the stories, carried on the wind, a warning etched into the dusk's shroud. The wilderness waits, silent and patient, the faded choir song pulsing beneath the earth. The hum persists, soft and inviting, beckoning the next wanderer who dares to hear its call. In the quaint, isolated village of Hollow Creek, nestled between the towering mountains and the dense forest, an eerie silence hung heavy in the air. The villagers, a close-knit community, had long been accustomed to the peculiarities of their remote home. However, the recent events had left them unsettled, their nights filled with unease and their days with whispered fears. The trouble began when old Mrs. Harrington, the village's eldest resident, started hearing whispers in the dead of night. She would wake up, her heart pounding, convinced that someone was in her room. Yet, every time she turned on the light, she found herself alone, the whispers fading into the darkness. She tried to dismiss it as the ramblings of an aging mind, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Mrs. Harrington confided in her neighbor Emily, a young woman with a keen interest in the village's folklore. Emily listened intently, her eyes widening as Mrs. Wonderday Harrington described the chilling whispers. Emily promised to look into the matter, her curiosity piqued. She spent hours poring over old books and manuscripts, searching for any mention of similar occurrences in the village's history. Meanwhile, strange things began to happen around Hollow Creek. Livestock went missing, only to be found later, their bodies mutilated in ways that defied explanation. The villagers blamed wild animals, but the eerie precision of the cuts suggested something far more sinister. Fear gripped the community, and many began to lock their doors at night, something they had never done before. Emily's research led her to a centuries-old legend about a malevolent spirit that haunted the forest surrounding Hollow Creek. According to the legend, the spirit fed on fear and despair, its power growing with each whispered secret. The villagers had long forgotten the tale, dismissing it as a mere ghost story. But Emily couldn't shake off the feeling that the legend was somehow connected to the recent events. She shared her findings with Mrs. Harrington, who listened with a growing sense of dread. The old woman remembered hearing the legend from her grandmother, who had warned her never to venture into the forest alone. Mrs. Harrington had heeded the warning, but she feared that the spirit had found a way to reach them nonetheless. Determined to put an end to the whispers, Emily decided to confront the spirit. She ventured into the forest, armed with nothing but her courage and a small book of ancient incantations she had found in her research. The forest was eerily silent, the usual chorus of birds and insects conspicuously absent. Emily could feel the spirit's presence, a cold, malevolent force that seemed to press against her very soul. As she delved deeper into the forest, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from all around her, their words indistinct but filled with malice. Emily fought the urge to turn back, her resolve strengthening with each step. She reached a clearing, the heart of the forest, where the whispers were loudest. There she found an ancient stone altar, its surface stained with what looked like dried blood. Emily opened the book of incantations, her hands trembling as she began to read aloud. The whispers grew louder, more frenzied, as if the spirit sensed her intent. She faltered, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of whispers, but she pressed on, her voice growing stronger with each word. The whispers began to fade, the spirit's hold on the forest weakening. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, its form shimmering like a mirage. It was Mrs. Harrington, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Emily gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. The old woman spoke, her voice echoing with the whispers of the spirit. "You cannot banish me," she said, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "I am a part of this village, a part of its very soul." Emily stared at Mrs. Harrington, her mind racing. She realized that the spirit had been using the old woman as a vessel, feeding on her fears and those of the villagers. She knew she had to act fast before the spirit could regain its strength. She continued the incantation, her voice steady and strong, her eyes locked onto Mrs. Harrington's glowing gaze. The spirit screamed, its form writhing in agony as the incantation took effect. Mrs. Harrington collapsed, her body convulsing as the spirit was forced out. Emily rushed to her side, cradling the old woman in her arms. The whispers faded away, the forest returning to its natural state. The spirit was gone, banished back to the shadows from whence it came. Mrs. Harrington opened her eyes, her gaze clear and free from the spirit's influence. She looked up at Emily, a weak smile on her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Emily smiled back, relieved that the ordeal was finally over. She helped the old woman to her feet, and together they made their way back to the village. The villagers greeted them with relief and gratitude, their fears finally laid to rest. They listened intently as Emily recounted her harrowing encounter with the spirit, their eyes wide with awe and admiration. From that day forward, Emily was hailed as a hero, her name whispered in reverence among the villagers. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the villagers began to forget the true nature of the whispers. They dismissed the events as a mere tale, a story to be told around the fire on cold winter nights. Emily watched with a growing sense of unease, knowing that the spirit was not truly gone, but merely waiting for the day when fear and despair would once again grip the hearts of the villagers. She knew that the battle was far from over, that the spirit would return, stronger and more malevolent than before. But she was ready, her resolve unwavering. She would stand guard, a silent sentinel, protecting the village from the whispers of the shadows. For she knew that the true horror lay not in the spirit itself, but in the fear that it fed upon, the fear that lurked within the hearts of the villagers. As the years passed, Emily became a legend in her own right. Her story passed down from generation to generation. The villagers spoke of her with reverence, their voices filled with awe and admiration. But as the tale grew, so too did the whispers, their malevolent presence lingering at the edge of the village, waiting for the day when fear would once again take hold. And so, the cycle continued, the battle between light and darkness, hope and despair, waged in the hearts and minds of the villagers. The whispers remained, a constant reminder of the horror that lurked in the shadows, waiting for the day when it would once again rise to claim the souls of the unwary. But as long as there were those who remembered, who stood guard against the darkness, the village of Hollow Creek would endure, a beacon of hope in the face of the unknown. In the end, it was not the spirit that defined the village, but the courage and resilience of its people. For they knew that the true strength lay not in the absence of fear, but in the ability to face it head on, to stand tall in the face of adversity, and to never ever give in to the whispers of the shadows. And so, the legend of Hollow Creek lived on, a testament to the indomitable spirit of its people, a beacon of light in the darkest of nights. The forest, once a place of dread, became a symbol of their triumph, a reminder of the battle they had fought and won. The villagers ventured into its depths, their hearts filled with pride and determination. They knew that the spirit was still out there, waiting, watching, but they were no longer afraid, for they had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. And so, the tale of Hollow Creek came to a close. A story of courage and resilience, of light and darkness, of the indomitable spirit of a people who refused to be consumed by fear. The whispers remained a constant reminder of the battle they had fought, but they no longer held power over the villagers. For they knew that as long as they stood together, as long as they remembered, they would never be alone in the shadows. The end of the story marked a new beginning for the village, a time of peace and prosperity. The villagers went about their daily lives, their hearts filled with hope and determination. They knew that the battle was far from over, that the spirit would return, stronger and more malevolent than before. But they were ready, their resolve unwavering, their spirits united in the face of the unknown. And so the legend of Hollow Creek lived on, a testament to the indomitable spirit of its people, a beacon of light in the darkest of nights. The whispers remained a constant reminder of the battle they had fought, but they no longer held power over the villagers. For they knew that as long as they stood together, as long as they remembered, they would never be alone in the shadows. The end.